I was just a housekeeper watching my boss's son fail at everything, while my own daughter could see exactly what was wrong. When Isabella secretly taught Brandon her secret, I had no idea Mr. Grayson was watching from the doorway. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, what was your favorite subject in school? Drop it in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day. Now, let me take you back to the day I realized that sometimes the help we need comes from the most unexpected places. The Grayson estate was the kind of place you see in magazines: sprawling lawns, marble fountains, and a main house so large you could get lost in it. I'd been working there for 8 months as head housekeeper, and every morning I still felt like I was trespassing in someone else's dream. My daughter Isabella and I lived in the guest cottage on the property, a small but comfortable 2-bedroom house that was nicer than any place we'd ever called home. At 36, I'd been cleaning houses and offices for almost a decade, but this job was different. The pay was excellent, the benefits were comprehensive, and for the first time since Isabella was born, I felt like we had real security. George Grayson was exactly what you'd expect from a tech billionaire: brilliant, demanding, and completely focused on success. He'd built his empire from nothing, turning a small software company into a global corporation worth billions. He was also a widower, raising his 12-year-old son Brandon alone since his wife had died 3 years earlier. Brandon was a sweet kid, polite, kind, and genuinely caring, but he was also, according to his father and every teacher he'd ever had, a complete academic failure. I witnessed their daily battles from the sidelines, cleaning the study while Mr. Grayson reviewed Brandon's latest report card, organizing the library while expensive tutors tried unsuccessfully to help Brandon with his homework. The conversations were always the same. "Brandon, this is unacceptable," Mr. Grayson would say, his voice tight with frustration. "You're a smart boy. You just need to apply yourself." "I am trying, Dad. I really am." "Trying isn't enough. You need to focus. You need to work harder. Do you think success just happens? Do you think I built this company by making excuses?" I'd watch Brandon's shoulders slump a little more with each criticism, see the light dim in his eyes as he internalized his father's disappointment. Mr. Grayson wasn't cruel. He clearly loved his son, but he couldn't understand why a child with every advantage, every resource, every opportunity continued to struggle with basic academics. The tutors came and went like a parade of expensive failures: math specialists, reading experts, study skills coaches. Mr. Grayson hired the best money could buy, but nothing seemed to help. Brandon's grades remained consistently poor, his confidence continued to erode, and the tension between father and son grew thicker every day. What broke my heart was that I knew exactly what was wrong with Brandon. I recognized the signs because I'd lived with them for years. My daughter Isabella was also 12, and she had dyslexia, severe dyslexia that had gone undiagnosed until she was 9 years old. For years, teachers had labeled her as lazy, unmotivated, or simply not very bright. I'd fought tooth and nail to get her properly evaluated, spending money I didn't have on specialists and learning support programs.
Isabella was brilliant, creative, insightful, and incredibly empathetic. But traditional learning was a struggle for her. Letters flipped and danced on the page, words jumbled together, and reading was an exhausting battle that left her frustrated and defeated. But we'd found ways to help her. With the right support and understanding, Isabella had learned to thrive academically. Watching Brandon struggle with the exact same issues was like watching a replay of Isabella's early school years. The way he held books too close to his face, the way he traced words with his finger, the way he'd guess at words instead of actually reading them, every behavior screamed dyslexia to me. But I was just the housekeeper. Who was I to suggest that George Grayson's son had a learning disability? Who was I to imply that this brilliant, successful man didn't understand his own child's needs? I'd tried to hint at it once, very carefully, when Mr. Grayson was complaining about Brandon's latest tutor. "Sometimes children just learn differently," I'd said while dusting his desk. My daughter struggled with reading too, until we found the right approach. Mr. Grayson had looked at me with polite but dismissive interest. Brandon doesn't have a learning problem, Kendra. He has a motivation problem. He's been tested by the best educational psychologists money can buy. His IQ is above average. He just needs to apply himself. I'd nodded and continued cleaning, but inside, I was screaming. Those best educational psychologists had probably given Brandon the same outdated tests that had missed Isabella's dyslexia for years. They'd probably focused on his intelligence rather than his processing differences, concluding that since he was smart, his struggles must be behavioral. The worst part was watching Brandon internalize his father's frustration. The Buddha was starting to believe he was stupid, lazy, a disappointment. But I knew how precarious my position was. This job was the best thing that ever happened to Isabella and me. The salary allowed me to pay for Isabella's continued learning support, the health insurance covered her therapy sessions, and the stable housing meant she could attend the same school for more than a year. If I overstepped my boundaries, if I offended Mr. Grayson by suggesting his parenting approach was wrong, I could lose everything. And then where would Isabella and I be? So I stayed silent, cleaning around the edges of their struggles, watching a brilliant boy slowly lose faith in himself while his father remained blind to the real problem. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in October. Mr. Grayson had left that morning for a week-long business trip to Singapore, leaving Brandon with his latest tutor, a stern woman named Mrs. Powell, who believed that discipline and repetition could overcome any learning challenge. I was cleaning the main library when I heard crying. Soft, muffled sobs coming from behind one of the tall bookshelves. I followed the sound and found Brandon sitting on the floor, surrounded by textbooks, tears streaming down his face. "Brandon," I said gently, "are you okay, sweetheart?" He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I can't do it, Mrs. Kendra. I can't read this stupid book. Mrs. Powell says if I don't finish the chapter by tomorrow, she's going to tell my dad I'm not trying hard enough." I looked at the book in his lap, a 7th grade history textbook with dense paragraphs and small print. For a child with dyslexia, it might as well have been written in a foreign language. "Can I see?" I asked, sitting down beside him.
Brandon handed me the book, and I could immediately see the problem. The text was cramped, the font was difficult, and there were no visual breaks to help organize the information. It was exactly the kind of material that would be torture for someone with dyslexia. "Brandon," I said carefully, "when you look at these words, what do you see?" "I don't know," he said miserably. "They just move around. When I try to focus on one word, the others get blurry." My heart broke. It was the exact same description Isabella had given me years earlier. Before I could answer, I heard footsteps approaching. Isabella appeared around the bookshelf, her backpack slung over her shoulder, having just gotten home from school. "Mom?" she said, then noticed Brandon's tear-streaked face. "Oh, hi, Brandon." "Hi, Isabella," Brandon said, quickly wiping his eyes and trying to look less upset. Isabella looked from Brandon to the textbook to me, and I could see the wheels turning in her 12-year-old mind. She'd grown up understanding her own learning differences, and she was remarkably perceptive about recognizing similar struggles in others. "Are you having trouble reading?" she asked Brandon directly, with the kind of straightforward honesty that only children possess. Brandon's face flushed red. I'm not very smart, I guess." "That's not true," Isabella said firmly, dropping her backpack and sitting down across from him. "Do the letters dance for you too?" Brandon stared at her. "Too?" "The letters dance for me," Isabella said matter-of-factly. "They flip around and move and sometimes disappear completely. It's called dyslexia. It doesn't mean you're not smart, it just means your brain works differently." I held my breath, watching this conversation unfold. Isabella was doing what I'd been too afraid to do for months, giving Brandon the explanation he desperately needed. "You have that?" Brandon asked, his voice full of wonder. Yep, and I bet you do too. Want to see something cool? Isabella reached into her backpack and pulled out a set of colored plastic overlays, transparent sheets in different colors that she used to make reading easier. Try this, she said, placing a blue overlay over the page of Brandon's textbook. Brandon looked down at the page and his eyes widened. The words, they're not moving as much. Right? The color helps your brain process the text better. And look, Isabella pulled out a reading ruler, a simple tool that helped isolate lines of text so the other words didn't distract you. For the next 20 minutes, I watched my daughter teach Brandon techniques that had taken us years to discover. She showed him how to use his finger to track words, how to break long words into smaller chunks, and how to use context clues when he couldn't decode a particular word. "This is amazing," Brandon said, successfully reading a paragraph for the first time. "Why doesn't anyone else know about this stuff?" Because most people don't understand dyslexia. They think it means you're dumb, but that's not true. Some of the smartest people in the world have dyslexia, like Richard Branson and Steven Spielberg. Really? Really? My mom says dyslexic brains are just wired for creativity and big picture thinking instead of detail stuff like spelling and reading. I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I watched these two children connect over their shared struggle. "Isabella," I said gently, "we should probably let Brandon get back to his homework." "Actually," Brandon said, looking at me with hopeful eyes, "could Isabella maybe help me with this chapter? I think I could actually understand it with her tricks." I hesitated. Mrs. Powell had left for the day, and Mr. Grayson was halfway around the world. What harm could it do? "Okay," I said, "just for today." That "just for today" turned into a week of secret study sessions. Every afternoon, after Isabella got home from school and Mrs. Powell left for the day, the two children would meet in the library. Isabella would share her dyslexia strategies, and Brandon would practice reading with her support. The transformation was remarkable. With the right tools and techniques, Brandon wasn't struggling anymore. He was succeeding. He read entire chapters, completed assignments, and for the first time in his academic life, felt certain about his abilities. "I'm not stupid," he told Isabella one afternoon, his voice full of wonder. "I just needed to learn how to learn." "Exactly," Isabella said. "Your brain is awesome. It just works differently than other people's brains." I watched these sessions from a distance, cleaning nearby rooms but keeping an ear out for their conversations. Part of me was thrilled to see Brandon finally getting the help he needed, but another part of me was terrified about what would happen when Mr. Grayson returned. How would I explain that his son had been getting academic help from my 12-year-old daughter? How would I justify keeping this from him? And what would happen when he discovered that Brandon's struggles weren't about motivation or effort, but about an undiagnosed learning difference? My fears were realized on Friday afternoon when Mr. Grayson returned from his trip a day early. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard his car in the driveway. My heart started racing as I realized that Brandon and Isabella were in the library, in the middle of one of their study sessions. "Kendra?" Mr. Grayson called as he entered the house. "Where's Brandon? And where's Mrs. Powell?" "Mrs. Powell left for the day," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Brandon is in the library." "Good. I want to see how he's progressing with his studies. Mrs. Powell sent me a message saying her teachings are working and Brandon is getting better. Isn't it great?" Mr. Grayson strode toward the library with the confident pace of a man accustomed to being in control. I followed behind, my stomach churning with anxiety. We reached the library doorway just as Brandon was reading aloud from his history textbook, his voice clear and confident. Isabella sat beside him, the colored overlay and reading ruler spread out on the table between them. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the late 18th century and was characterized by the transition from hand production methods to machines, new chemical manufacturing processes, and improved efficiency of water power. Mr. Grayson stopped dead in his tracks.
I'd never seen Brandon read with such fluency and comprehension. "Brandon?" Mr. Grayson said, his voice confused. Both children looked up, startled. Isabella immediately began gathering her reading tools, clearly sensing that they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't have been doing. "Dad," Brandon said, his face lighting up, "Isabella thinks I may have dyslexia. She's been helping me with my reading, and I can actually understand everything now." Mr. Grayson's eyes moved from his son to Isabella to the reading aids on the table, then finally to me standing in the doorway. "Kendra," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "could I speak with you privately?" My heart sank. This was it. I was about to lose the best job I ever had because I'd allowed my daughter to help his son without permission. "Isabella," I said, "please go to our house and start your homework." "But Mom." "Now, please."
Isabella gathered her things and left, giving Brandon an encouraging smile as she passed. Brandon looked confused and worried, clearly sensing the tension in the room. "Brandon," Mr. Grayson said, "please go to your room. I need to talk to Mrs. Kendra." "Am I in trouble?" Brandon asked. "No, son, you're not in trouble." After Brandon left, Mr. Grayson closed the library doors and turned to face me. I braced myself for his anger, for accusations of overstepping my boundaries, for the conversation that would end with me packing our belongings. Instead, he sank into one of the leather chairs and put his head in his hands. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long what, sir?" "How long have you known that Brandon has dyslexia?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected anger, not this quiet defeat. I suspected it for months, but I wasn't sure, and I didn't think it was my place to say anything. "Why didn't you tell me?" I took a deep breath. "Because I was afraid you'd fire me for overstepping my boundaries. Because I'm just the housekeeper and you're you. Because I needed this job and I couldn't risk losing it." Mr. Grayson looked up at me, and I was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "Do you know what I've been doing to him? Do you know how many times I've called him lazy, unmotivated, not trying hard enough? Mr. Grayson, I've been destroying my son's self-esteem because I was too proud to consider that he might be different, too convinced that success is just a matter of working harder." He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the grounds. My wife would have known. Laura would have seen what I missed. She was always better with Brandon, more intuitive about his needs. "You're not a bad father," I said gently. "You just didn't have the right information. But you did. Your daughter did. And instead of coming to me, you felt like you had to help him in secret because you were afraid of me." The pain in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't anger. This was a man realizing he'd failed his child. "What do I do now? How do I fix this?" "You get Brandon properly evaluated by specialists who understand dyslexia. You learn about his learning differences and how to support them. And you tell him that his struggles weren't his fault, that he's not lazy or stupid, and that you're proud of him for working so hard despite the challenges he was facing." Mr. Grayson nodded slowly. "And Mrs. Powell?" "Mrs. Powell doesn't understand dyslexia. Brandon needs someone who specializes in learning differences, someone who can teach him strategies that work with his brain instead of against it. Like your daughter did." Isabella has been where Brandon is. She understands what it feels like to have letters dance on the page, to feel stupid when you're actually smart, to work twice as hard as everyone else just to keep up. Mr. Grayson was quiet for a long moment. "Kendra, I owe you an apology, and I owe Isabella a debt of gratitude. She gave my son something I couldn't: hope. She gave him understanding. Sometimes that's all a struggling child needs. I want to do better. I want to be the father Brandon deserves. Will you help me? I stared at him in surprise. Help you how? Help me understand dyslexia. Help me learn how to support Brandon properly. Help me find the right specialists and resources. Mr. Grayson, I'm not an expert. I'm just a mother who's been through this with her own child. That makes you exactly the expert I need, he said firmly. You've walked this path. You know what works and what doesn't. You understand what Brandon is going through because you've watched Isabella go through the same thing.
Over the next few weeks, everything changed at the Grayson estate. Mr. Grayson fired Mrs. Powell and began interviewing specialists who understood dyslexia. He read every book I recommended, attended webinars about learning differences, and completely transformed his approach to Brandon's education. More importantly, he had a long, honest conversation with Brandon about dyslexia, about the struggles he'd been facing, and about how proud he was of his son's perseverance. "I'm sorry I didn't understand," Mr. Grayson told Brandon one evening as I was cleaning nearby. "I'm sorry I made you feel like your struggles were your fault. You've been working harder than I ever realized, and I'm incredibly proud of you." Brandon cried, tears of relief, of validation, of finally being understood by the person whose opinion mattered most to him. The new tutor Mr. Grayson hired was a specialist in dyslexia who immediately recognized Brandon's potential. With proper support and teaching methods designed for dyslexic learners, Brandon's grades improved dramatically. More importantly, his confidence soared. Isabella and Brandon remained friends, bonding over their shared understanding of learning differences. They studied together, shared strategies, and supported each other through academic challenges. "It's like having a sister who gets it," Brandon told me one day. "Isabella understands things about me that even my dad is still learning." Mr. Grayson also made changes to his own approach to parenting. He learned to celebrate Brandon's strengths, his creativity, his problem-solving abilities, his empathy, instead of focusing solely on his academic struggles. "I spend so much time trying to fix what I thought was broken. I never stopped to appreciate what was already perfect about him." 6 months after that day in the library, Mr. Grayson called me into his study for what I thought would be a routine check-in about household matters. Instead, he had a proposal that left me speechless. "Kendra, I've been thinking about your role here. You've been invaluable in helping Brandon, and I'd like to formalize that contribution." "I don't understand." "I want to create a new position for you. You'd be like a family secretary, but most important, an educational coordinator for Brandon. You'd schedule all our appointments as a family, but also oversee Brandon's learning support program, coordinate with his specialists, manage his tutoring schedule, and ensure he has everything he needs to succeed academically." I stared at him in shock. "Mr. Grayson, I don't have any formal training in education." "You have something better. Experience with learning differences and a deep understanding of what Brandon needs. You'd work closely with his specialists, but you'd be the one ensuring everything is coordinated and working together effectively." "What about housekeeping?" "We'll hire additional staff for that. This is more important work, being Brandon's advocate and ensuring his educational needs are met properly." The salary he offered was significantly higher than my housekeeping wage, and the work felt meaningful, helping one child get the support he needed to thrive. "There's one more thing," Mr. Grayson said. "I'd like Isabella to continue as Brandon's study partner. I'll ensure she has any learning support she needs too, and I want her to know that her help with Brandon has been invaluable." That evening, I sat with Isabella in our cottage, telling her about Mr. Grayson's offer. "So, I'd be like Brandon's official helper?" she asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "You'd be his study partner and friend, just like you already are, but Mr. Grayson wants to make sure you have all the support you need, too." Isabella smiled. "I think that's perfect, Mom." A year later, I was sitting in my new office, a converted room in the main house that Mr. Grayson had equipped with the latest assistive technology and learning resources. I'd completed certification courses in dyslexia support. Brandon was thriving academically and personally. His grades had improved dramatically, but more importantly, he'd developed confidence in his abilities and pride in his unique way of thinking. Isabella continued to excel as well, and her friendship with Brandon had taught both children that learning differences weren't obstacles to overcome. They were simply different ways of experiencing and understanding the world. Mr. Grayson had become a different father, patient, understanding, and focused on supporting Brandon's strengths rather than fixing his weaknesses. He'd also become an advocate for learning differences, funding research and supporting programs for children with dyslexia. "You know what I learned from all this?" he told me during one of our weekly meetings about Brandon's progress. "What's that?" "That sometimes the most important insights come from the most unexpected sources. I was so focused on hiring expensive experts that I missed the expertise that was right in front of me. Isabella just saw a friend who needed help. And you saw a child who was struggling unnecessarily. You both had the knowledge and compassion to help, but I'd created an environment where you felt like you couldn't speak up. You've changed that now. I hope so. I never want another child to suffer in silence because the adults around them are too proud or too blind to see what they need." That afternoon, I found Brandon and Isabella in the library, working together on a history project. Brandon was reading aloud confidently, using the strategies Isabella had taught him, while she took notes and asked thoughtful questions. The Renaissance was a period of cultural rebirth, characterized by renewed interest in art, science, and learning. That's like what happened to you, your own Renaissance, when you learned about dyslexia. Brandon laughed. "Yeah, except instead of art and science, I discovered that I'm actually smart." "You were always smart," Isabella corrected. "You just needed the right tools to show it." As I watched them work together, I thought about how much had changed since that day I'd found Brandon crying in the library. Two children who'd been struggling with the same invisible challenge had found each other and, in doing so, had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. The letters had stopped dancing for both of them, but more importantly, they'd learned that being different wasn't something to hide or be ashamed of. It was something to understand, support, and celebrate. And sometimes the most profound changes happen when we're brave enough to speak up for the children who can't yet speak up for themselves. An absolutely beautiful story about recognizing hidden struggles, the power of peer understanding, and how sometimes children can teach adults the most important lessons. What's your favorite subject in school? Share it in the comments below. If this story of learning differences, unexpected friendships, and the courage to advocate for struggling children touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories about finding your voice and helping others find theirs. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.